Yeah, so thank you so much to everyone who came or is watching this. Today's session will be well worth your time. By the end of this session, you'll learn why the universe is a scientist, how the universe creates itself, how perception works and creates life, what is our role in the universe as human beings, and why the CTMU is, in a syntactic sense, is literally the universe. So if you're hooked, then let's go. So, what do we mean when we say that the CTMU is the heart of all science? This is a phrase I've used. This means that science depends on our ability to make observations and inferences about them. So, what is science basically? Science can't explain itself. So, let me explain what I mean by this. There's no theoretical model in science that explains why theories, these ideas in our minds, can correspond in any way, shape, or form to the actual real universe, to things out there in the world, why there are regular patterns in nature or why there's any reason at all in the cosmos. So, whence comes this mysterious order? How, in other words, is there any connection between our theories, our ideas, and the universe, our reality? This problem has often been framed in terms of the unity of perceptual reality. Why, if we live in this very volatile universe with no clear logical order, are there no jumps or breaks in our perception, which seem to follow these physical laws at all times? So, science, in essence, is the ability for us to hypothesize, have an idea about something in the world that we live in, perform an experiment, make an observation, analyze whether the observation confirms or rejects the theory, perform another experiment to double check, and if the experiments agree with the results, we can induce that our theory is correct. But what if we have no hypothesis at all? In reality theory, we're simply confronted with observation after observation. We have to make meaning out of our perception. So clearly, no standard scientific procedure could give us an understanding of the deep matters that metaphysics seeks to answer. What are space, time, and cognition? What is the nature of causation, substance, and change? How do things manifest in the world at all? Why is there something rather than nothing? These are questions that are strictly outside of the domain of science. So we have no theory. We've lost the first step of science. We can't perform an experiment, we can't make observations, and so forth. As we discussed last week, reality understands itself. Therefore, reality has a theory about itself that is, in its internal model, the fullness of the universe. For reality, theory and universe are two ways of talking about the same thing. One is the abstract cognitive aspect of reality, that's the theory, and one is the concrete embodied aspect of reality, that is the universe. And so reality is a complex system. It is an interdependent whole that somehow, again, we don't have any theories yet, but somehow it created star systems, galaxies, biological life, and has this marvelous self-organization and complexity in every part and aspect. And so there's a modern branch of science called systems theory or complexity theory. And the idea is how we can figure this out. How, without intentional intervention, do we have these marvelously complex things like planets, even like trees or a single cell, which require millions of interdependent parts with a shared functionality and have this higher order coherence? Everything seems to work together. And so, why and how can they exist as one unified entity? Why am I Tommy and not 36 trillion cells? What does it mean to see the forest through the trees? The forest, a living system with higher order coherence, is not a mere collection of trees, but it is a larger organism that uses trees as its agents. And so you can think of the borders of that forest as the borders of its identity. And so this is, but even that, that forest, it can't be separated from the earth or its location. So everything is interconnected. And this is a holistic way of thinking about the world. It's not as a set of fragmentary parts, but as an interdependent whole. So we observe complex systems. So what? It means that there is a supporting infrastructure to the things that we perceive. We are not perceiving mere scattered instances and making meaning out of them. We are observing things in the universe that are already meaningful and then finding out about them. So this is why two scientists performing the same experiment arrive at the same results. This is why the bird that you see and I see is the same bird. So then, if reality is not only our observations, but also the explanatory infrastructure behind them, what does that tell us about the world we live in? And I'll pause for answers now. Is it material, or what does it mean that our reality has to exist in a way that observation and perception is possible?
I'd say they're probably two sides of the same coin, so to speak. They're both extended out of the same underlying substrate in some way, would be my way of saying it.
Yeah, exactly. So like perception and the way that perception works have to be two elements of the same thing. So what else?
Sorry, Tommy, I was writing there. Could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, so if reality is not only our observations, but also the explanatory infrastructure behind them, what does that tell us about the world that we live in?
I mean, it tells us many things. It tells us that the set of reality is sort of like one side of um, the elements, which elements aren't just objects, like you said. Then they're actually principles as well, which are contained within reality, and therefore um, they are affected by expansion and this dynamic flow, this dynamic telesis going on constantly.
Yeah, exactly. And so that substrate has to give rise both to perceiving agents and perceptual input. So it's not just material, because material reality is only a secondary feature of reality that can serve as input to perception. So this doesn't mean that we're talking about solipsism, that you and I are the only real beings in reality and everyone else is just a fake avatar. But it also can't mean that we live in a purely objective reality. Reality is trying to tell us something deeper, more interesting about itself. We live not in an objective or merely subjective universe, but a super subjective universe in which each of our perceptions collectively is harmonized to give rise to the material universe. And our wills are somehow harmonized into a collective reality that we can't necessarily directly affect, but is designed to take our needs into account. So last week we said that the purpose of reality basically is self-identification. Humans function as identification operators, meaning that we are included in the basic structure and dynamics of the universe. We are a part of the evolution of reality, and reality intentionally brought us about for this very purpose, to be observer participants. Otherwise, there would be no need for us. In fact, there would be no need for the material universe. Identification operators connect mental and physical reality because their cognition can process and recognize the universe. It can encode external information internally, and then the universe itself, which is, as our best science is now starting to tell us with ideas such as integrated information theory, is a self-synthesizing informational system. So therefore, as Langan writes in the first sentence of the CTMU, A New Kind of Reality Theory paper, inasmuch as science is observational or perceptual in nature, the goal of providing a scientific model and mechanism for the evolution of complex systems ultimately requires a supporting theory of reality of which perception itself is the model, or theory to universe mapping. So this is precisely what the CTMU does. It takes the bare minimum necessity of reality, perception, and induces a theory of reality based on the mind-universe connection that has to be real if any of our perceptions work. So why is the universe so complex? Because we make it so, because there is this intrinsic loop whereby our observer participancy gives rise to information, which then in turn gives rise to the laws of physics. That quantum information parameterizes how the universe evolves, and the universe is then intentionally striving to bring about further observer participancy. So we are implicated in the logical loop of reality's informational synthesis. So that is what's needed to explain science, human sight, and perception and reality. So how does the CTMU define reality? Reality is perception plus it is the explanatory infrastructure, all of the infrastructure for perception to work. So for sight to work, we need to be able to encode information about the external world in our brains, which means A, a mind universe correspondence, B, a role for human identification operators, C, biological systems that are able to process information, such as sight, the brain interprets visual information, and so forth. Basically, we need a universe whose consciousness and creativity are immanent in the very fabric of nature. The cosmos is trying to see itself, to catch its reflections in the mind, to catch its reflection in the minds and soul of its creature. Reality as a whole is an identification operator that attributes existence to itself and thus bootstraps itself into existence. Everything in reality is one original thought, the infinite source and soul of all of the universe, trying to see itself, trying to identify itself. And so it does. Thus, the evolution of human sight and thought is not an accident of random mutation, but the natural implication of a living universe that complexifies itself for the purpose of self-recognition. We live in a universe that is bound to converge on cognition and perception, and so it does. So it does. So perception is the model of complexity. This is the feedback loop that drives the meta-Darwinism of the CTMU. Not only does life evolve through natural selection, but nature itself evolves through selection. It constantly chooses the best pathway to see itself better. It is self-replicating, creating more of itself, seeing what works, what survives in an intentional reality is what's best, because everything that is actual, God intended to bring into existence, exempting evil, which is a privation of the good, but nevertheless, the potential for that is still within the seed of the design for reality. So the universe creates a theory about how to evolve, tries it out, sees if it works, tinkers with it, tries it again, and then using its powers of generalized cognition and creative evolution, it can embed that design into the very structure of reality, confirming the theory. And as you know, a true theory is the universe, because if you have a true theory, that is something that is actually real in the universe. And so what does that sound like? What is this process that reality in the universe is doing? It's doing science. Reality is a scientist, is coming up with a hypothesis, performing an experiment, and then confirming that. And then if that is confirmed, it is embedded in the very structure and dynamics such that reality can continually use that design for an idea for its continued evolution and improvement. So reality is a scientist studying itself, and in the process of its self-learning and self-memorization, gives life to the world. Life is evolving towards the self-identification of reality. Every finite process, property, and relation converges on the self-knowledge of the infinite, which seeks to understand itself through the creation of the cosmos and share its self-knowledge with us. This is the universe, Frankenstein and his monster, us, seeking in vain for our Father. The word, which is the language that says to reality what to create, is the perception that worked. It is all of the true theories. It is truthful perception manifested into the universe. As yeah.
Oh, sorry. I have a question. So that's really interesting. You mentioned the universe, that God is like the ultimate scientist. I never thought about it that way. That's a really interesting way of thinking about it. But you also mentioned that the universe, it tests hypotheses hypotheses, and then based on the outcome, it either keeps those designs or throws them away. You said something like that, and that's something like religious laws, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of it's akin to that. I think it might be a little more general, is you have this idea in the CTMU
So
of
like mathematical laws as well, and scientific laws and oral laws, or everything that works, everything that we've used and works and has been proven to work on multiple occasions.
yeah, exactly. And so that means that reality and its laws evolve in coupling.
Yeah. So, but I mean, as someone who's read Nietzsche, he makes the point that anything that any useful any useful action, any action that we do as useful now will be useless at another point, and any useless action now will be dubbed useful. It's like, violence was once useful, or violence still can be useful at certain points, or he makes the case that it can,
Yeah.
it might not be, but he makes the case that it can. So since these things are destined to change depending on the environment, um, how do you separate the universal laws from the laws which are subject to change?
Yeah, so essentially what happens is there are sort of more eternal higher intelligences which are called primary telic recursive parameters, and these are essentially items on reality's agenda. It's things that are baked into its intrinsic structure, and the most general of these is self-recognition. It's that it forms a telon, meaning it's something in the future that drives all of these different designs and processes that all converge on reality seeking to identify itself. And then that stratifies into the way that it does that, and does that through the creation of the material universe. It does that through the creation of observer participants and so forth. And so everything in the and so but it's not entirely determined. It's not like everything in the universe is just a puppet. Not only we have freedom, but there is this kind of self-distributed freedom that is intrinsic.
Sorry, I think of it like you have a covenant with God. When you have a covenant with God, you should probably do what God says most of the time, but God is still willing to listen to you. God accepts your will, and God, in fact, designed your will. And so, if you want to have a covenant with God, you need to actually, so sometimes you need to talk with them as if you is your friend, and, you can argue your way out of it, but
Yeah, exactly. And you see that a couple times in the Bible is for example, Abraham argues with God over whether he should destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and says, well, what if there are just 50 righteous people, and then keeps going down? What if there are 40 and 30 and 20? And so I think things aren't quite as determined as we like to think.
yeah.
But there are these kind of general goals of reality, and at this point, the laws of physics aren't substantively going to change. And there are certain things, like I've speculated, that it wouldn't be possible for memory to work, and memory is important not only to us humans but to reality as a whole, because it's a self-memorizing system, is that memory couldn't work if entropy didn't always increase. And so there are ways that the universe works that were at some point an idea essentially, but then through recursive cross definition between how that idea worked in the universe and that created greater self-identification of the system, is now actually part of reality itself. And everything within reality contains that as a universal distributed form. And so the it's not like we can just change laws, and that applies to the moral law as well. But, reality is a lot, because we have this intrinsic role, reality is actually a lot more sensitive to our input than we think.
Yeah. You you mentioned a second ago, you said something about entropy, the entropy implies memory or something. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so we can go into that. I haven't
Yeah, sorry, you're yeah, go back to what you have planned or whatever.
Yeah, no problem. Well, that was something I discussed with Arval in my interview. It's something he brought up. I haven't looked into that too much, but it makes sense because you have to have this kind of disorder to have that arrow of time, is that entropy is the only process that isn't time reversible, isn't, you can plug in a negative input to that. So I would speculate that that has to do something with our experience of a future and a past, which is needed for cognition.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But the thing with, the universe, this is someone I've interviewed, Coronius Focus, who has talked about the CTMU and does it from this very evolutionary perspective. It's that like all true theories are truthful perception manifested into the universe. The word, which is the language that says to reality what to create, is perception that worked. So everything, we can talk about this drive to self-identification, but really what that is perception. So good designs are encoded and manifested into the universe. And so as Coronius Focus said, he said perception is the ultimate goal of life. That's what it's all doing. It's searching for a better way to perceive the universe, and that means to interact with it in a more complicated, robust, iterably stable way that can lead to further improvement. It's a constantly improving thing. So life is choosing and creating logos, is creating the word, is creating that metalinguistic identity of reality. So life and the word are actually in constant feedback with one another. So logos also creates life. It's a cycle. The word creates life and life creates the word. And that means that it implicates us in the language of existence. And so we are then part of the eternal word of the universe. We have this recursive definition, cross definition between the metalinguistic identity of reality and our feedback as observer participants. So if we are in line with the goals and intentions of that greater system, are actually very important to the structure and dynamics of reality. So this is the true meaning. We talk about John 1. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among men. So all of existence is the Word. It is this metalinguistic identity, and life is the Word made flesh. And Jesus in John 14 literally identifies himself as the life. It says, Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so I am the life. So Christians take the word one step further. It says if you can perceive and enact that perception, that true theory in the world, it is a creative force. It expands your species and your ability to interact with your universe. So remember, perception is the model of complex systems and their evolutions. Perception is how things become more complex, and that's what evolution is striving towards. That's what cosmic evolution is striving towards. So we can think, for example, of natural selection as the evolution of perception. Perception here is the ability to interact with the universe across repetitions of a process. Perception means identifying information to represent and understand the environment. That is what reality is doing. Reality is perceiving. It is identifying information to represent and understand the environment. And so in so doing, it is constructing and generating a space through which it can pass that has creative evolution that adapts on the fly to freely changing internal conditions. Every operator in reality is free in the fullest sense of the word, just as reality itself is free. If everything were determined, there would be no evolution. We live in an evolving universe. Without evolution, there is no reality. without evolution, there is no reality because information is the currency of perception. So therefore, if we live in an informational universe, we also live in a perceptual universe. Since according to the reality principle, nothing outside of reality affects reality, then reality is a self-processing information system that describes and processes itself, and in so doing, creates itself. If reality is also a language, the word, then reality is a self-configuring, self-processing informational system that describes and processes itself, and in so doing, creates itself. So the if reality is, and so this means that the word or the self-processing, self-configuring language, which is in the CTMU called the SCSPL, it's theory about reality, that abstract space of that language is reality itself. A true theory is the universe. So reality is a theory that generates and models itself. So the SCSPL's theory is the universe, because a true theory is the universe. And so this is what is meant by the cognitive theoretic model of the universe. Theory, model, and universe are the same. The theory describes the universe is governed by the theory, and the model connects between the theory and the universe. The model is perception. It is that which connects mental and physical reality. Otherwise, we would live in a dualistic universe. There would be no coherence, no science, no sight, and nothing would make sense. So if the cognitive theoretic model of the universe were untrue, then reality would be unintelligible. The CTMU is what holds the universe together because it is the real universe. A true theory is the real universe because the universe instantiates that theory. If I have a theory that, on Earth, the gravity, or in the universe, gravity is going to be inversely proportional to the square root of the distances between two objects, it's like that, and that's not true at the relative or quantum scales, but it's like that theory is actually the universe because the universe is the concrete aspect of that theory, and everything in the universe is governed according to those laws as far as we know. So perception itself is the model, and as we'll see, reality theory is also a metaphysical form of logic because logic is the structure of truth and truth is reality. Therefore, reality theory is logical. Reality is a self-executing algorithm that creates itself. It is information and cognition. It is the self-thinking thought, the first cause of everything real. It is input and output, theory and universe. It is a self-operating language. It speaks to itself, about how to evolve to the next state. And so everything in reality, this internal communication, it's the way it talks about itself to have these physical laws. Everything is in this general sense, not in the human sense, but it is a language. It is a system of communication that underlies reality. So the CTMU takes these linguistic operations and defines itself on them, meaning that the universe's self-learning is the CTMU's self-learning. So that because the universe is continually in the process of self-improvement, human knowledge can and must continue to grow. So our Compatriot Academy, this is what we're working to bring about, is to have this research program and bring about a second enlightenment in line with absolute truth. And that is possible because the CTMU, as this metaphysical form of logic, is not a compendium of absolute truth. It's not like we just have, every true statement, or even that most of the fundamental problems have been figured out yet, but it's fertile and it's fertile and well aerated soil through which human knowledge can spread. And so we need to be able to think about all these different disciplines, physics, biology, and so forth, in terms of the CTMU. So we are, just as the universe defines itself from infinite potential, there is actually each of us then are sowing that fertile and well aerated soil on which this new form of thought will be erected in a great awakening to mankind's expansive spiritual identity. So I'd like to thank every single one of you for taking the time this Sunday morning to go to this class and understand how important this is and how much gratitude I have for each and every one of you. This is truly great honor. Thank you very much. God bless. And so I'll take any questions that anyone has now.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned, so you were talking about logic for a second there, and I was just wondering, would you consider, you know, everything everything that you can see and perceive is contained, and that you can think about, I don't know, everything is contained within reality. So, and if that everything is also included, if logic is part of that everything, doesn't that mean that logic is an element within reality? It's that side of the conspansive manifold.
Yes, but not quite, because logic is actually the structure of reality itself.
Yeah.
So it's not
See, that's the
something.
thing, right? Because the CTMU abides, everything in the CTMU abides by logic. So it's sort of like reality itself. Logic is literally part of reality itself.
Yeah. And so it's not something, material, but it is something that applies to everything that is material, because logic is the structure of truth, and truth defines inclusion within reality. And so you have to start from logical principles in order to get to more interesting things. For example, the metaphysical ontology principle, which says that you can't have, or even just the reality principle is that you can't have two contradictory predicates. And this is something that's realized all the way back to Aristotle. And it's pretty much the most basic logical thing, is you can't have both something and not something in the same space. And so essentially what that defines is that you can have this logical space that is all that consists of all and only reality. And so you have this closed descriptive manifold, which perfectly embodies this metaphysical logic that then defines and parameterizes the universe. And so you can't have anything outside of the universe or outside of the causal relations of the universe, which is governed by logic, that has any bearing on how the universe actually works.
Yeah. So does anyone else want to say anything? Because I actually have quite a few questions.
Well, we can start with, we had something in the chat. Alpacap says, without representation, there would be no perception. So that's essentially true. I mean, there would be perception in this more general way of reality's iteration upon itself, but there couldn't be human perception. So we have to have, so part of perception is the terminal embodiment, is you have to actually have a real universe that is created in order such that you don't have just this like abstract world which of like form and potential, but you actually have a real universe that is possible to be seen and to iterate upon.
Yeah, this is something which, whenever I talk to anybody about the CTMU who I consider smart enough to even understand it, this is always their sticking point with the CTMU. It's that this so they always say, just because you call it reality doesn't make it reality. And I say, well, I'm not calling it something that it isn't. It is reality. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that this, by saying that this is reality, that is not a false statement. And to then get a set which represents reality, and then the elements inside that set represent the objects of reality, that cannot be false. That is true as, the sky is blue.
Yeah, exactly. And so where if you define,
frustrating because they always say it's just abstract. There's no connection to reality, and I'm saying no. This is reality.
Yeah, exactly. And so that goes back to this idea of dualism, is that there's this kind of fundamental belief that there's no possible way that mind and reality could share any common basis. And this is actually what Descartes believed, is that their reality and mind, so, and by extension, theory and universe, can be studied entirely apart from one another. And that enables you essentially to deny all theories and theorization and just say that that's a human invention. But then that doesn't explain why, certain theories are actually very effective at predicting the universe, and you yourself are positing a theory about the universe in so doing. And so this is one of the things that Charles Sanders Peirce talks about with Hume. Is Hume had this idea of empiricism, is that we can't actually know anything about the universe, but that invalidates our ability to do science, and it invalidates even Hume's own theory about the universe. So it's pretty nonsensical when you think about it, and doesn't make very much sense.
That's true. That would invalidate science then, because to say that a hypothesis is to say that you're hypothesizing about the state of the experiment, you're then saying that you know something about reality, which is basically identical to reality, but not identical. But I mean, the CTMU is identical, but in scientific thinking, it's not identical. It's a assumption, and then you test that.
Yeah, and so
A good scientist never ever says, a good scientist never says that they have proven their theory. A good scientist always says that they have found evidence to support their theory.
yeah, exactly. So you have to continue, and so that goes back to this idea that reality itself is in that process of science, is that it's a self-validating hypothesis, because it is through this cross definition between theory and universe, the universe actually validates its own abstract model through becoming a terminal self-simulation of that. And so there's not really any good use in denying this kind of basic principle, because to deny that is not only to deny science, but it's to deny logic, is that logic is the structure of truth. And so anything in the universe that is illogical is not going to make sense. So that is why the CTMU is built up from these principles that are called tautological. So that's simple things like, a bird is a type of animal. It's definitional things from which you can induce more complicated principles. So the most basic of these is the reality principle. Reality consists of all and only reality. And then, from that you get to mind equals reality, which just says that if there are minds within reality, then by syntactic unisect, reality is actually experiencing mind, and therefore mind and universe share a common structure, and reality itself can be modeled as a more general mind. And so you can get into more of these, but essentially all of this is built up from very simple logical principles, that to deny is to deny other fundamental assumptions of our thinking.
Yeah. Mm. You mentioned tautologies are definitely very important. Tautologies are sort of like the glue that hold the CTMU together, aren't they? They're sort of like they're the proof. The proof is in the pudding, literally. The tautologies are the proof. The CTMU is so simple because it encapsulates the everything, the global, and the something, the local, as two sides of an oxymoronic coin, and then just glues them all these different concepts together using tautology.
It's meta logic. It's like a reality logic that Chris Lang is trying to build. Like he's taking perception and he's looking at how it works and he's trying to get mathematical truths out of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's how the theory is built out. It's all built on tautologies from this like meta logic or reality logic.
It's
That's what it claims to be anyway.
Yes, it's very impressive because it also resolves the problem of a big problem in philosophy, which is closed logic or looping logic. It's like, you could say that the chicken, to use a very simple example, the chicken laid the egg and the egg made the chicken and the chicken laid the egg and who came first and blah blah blah. But it's more like that there are two elements and they're co-communicating with one another, kind of like at the same time. Yeah, something like that. But what was I going to say? Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, you're right. I mean, like it's with the chicken and the egg problem, it's like, well, everything at the end of the day is telesis, and the whole job of telesis is to make distinctions. So
Mhm.
it's something like both. Depends on
It
your
is.
perspective.
It is. Sorry, yeah, no. What I was going to say was about the tautologies. There seems to be some. You could actually differentiate certain tautologies in the CTMU because you said the CTMU is made up of tautologies. It is, but these tautologies are actually they actually have different jobs. So, for example, one of the jobs there's the reality principle. That's one. That tautology comes in a whole sentence. That which is real must be contained within reality. That's a sentence. Whereas other tautologies come in two words. Come in two words or two halves of a word. Which is like an oxymoron. So you actually, I think that it's important with the CTMU to be as specific as possible, just in order not to confuse anybody, because the theory can be confusing. I think that if you're really, really, really careful with the language, you can actually convey it to someone in an intelligent way and they can actually understand you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tricky thing, sorry, Tommy. I'm I'm kind of speaking freely, but what's interesting, it's a complex theory, it's also a subtle theory. Like
It
you
is.
can skim over things like syndifionesis and be like, yeah, same things and different. Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
But it's like there are actually very important ideas in there. And it's the basis for the entire rest of the theory. You do have to be continuing to think about syndifionesis as you go on. But when I first started studying it, I was like, I don't even know why this is important. But then I just
Yes.
had to read it over and over and over again. And
Yes.
then I understood.
No, yeah, you're completely right. Loads of people I've talked to about this, they just say, well, what the hell is the point? This sounds like just a lot of wordplay. What's the point? And I try to explain to them, this, it's not so, what this CTMU says isn't actually that important, really. It's more what we extract, what we imply from it, and how we apply it to things like theology and science and things like that. Because by themselves, in a universe where you just have the CTMU and no, Earth and nothing going on Earth and no reality and no physical happening, it kind of seems a bit boring because it's just words. But when you actually apply it, it actually says incredible things about God, and it just implies many very important things that have been a mystery since now. Did my
You go ahead, Tommy.
Oh yeah, exactly. And if you insist on it, you can actually, get that tautology down to fewer words. I mean, you can say just existence exists, and that reflects both the intentional aspect of existence, which is the predicate, which is the subject existence, and then the predicate exists is the is the extension of that basic thing. And then you can, with regard to like the chicken and egg thing, you can say that, this is, and, there is actually a pretty simple logical solution just based on words that which Chris Langan published in a popular magazine, which is basically just, if it depends on if you define egg as something containing a chicken or something laid by a chicken, and you can go through that. But the more interesting part is about the metaphysical dual of that, which is basically which came first, the non-terminal domain or the terminal
creator or the
domain,
creation.
the creator or the creation, the syntax, the rules, or the states, the things that were made by the rules. And the answer is that those are actually, that's a question coming from dualism, but the ultimate basis of reality is monism or self-dualism or self-duality, which essentially it says that creator and creation, syntax and state, the terminal and non-terminal domains, are two ways of talking about the same thing. And so everything is a self-simulation. There's both this ultimate basis of reality. This is what the Hindus might have called Brahman. It is ultimate reality. And then there is this veil of Maya, and which is essentially the illusion of this material universe that is authored by the world soul. And then you have us who are secondary images of that ultimate reality, who then work within the universe for the self-identification of that ultimate reality. And so everything is the same. And this is one of Chris Langan's most interesting statements. He says that the CTMU is Brahman Atman and Maya. It is what remains when Maya is pierced and Anava is dissolved. So essentially, what it's saying is that the CTMU is this self-dual model that encompasses every single one of those things. It encompasses the ego, our own internal self-representation, it encompasses our non-terminal identity, it encompasses the whole universe and the way that the universe is revealed to us. And everything in that is the same. So this is what we mean when we say that the CTMU is induced from perception and cognition. It's like everything in the universe has to connect in order for these things to work. And so, but what that also means is that it's also the logos. It is the word, and it is this language. It is this primordial form of existence that executes on itself for the purpose of the self-identification. So the CTMU brings all of these things together in a really beautiful way, and it is, it's like a self-laying egg is how I'd like to say it.
If you describe it as a self-laying egg, you're really going to like my guy.
Yeah, so I'm looking
because I'm actually thinking of having them as eggs. Like, the people who came up with the philosophy originally.
Yeah, amazing. And yeah, so Ethan asks, what would you say is the main distinction between non-dual Advaita Vedanta and the CTMU? So essentially, I'd say that those two things are pretty similar, and Chris Langan has actually said as much, that the CTMU is essentially a logical model of Vedanta Hinduism, and it also is, and also certain aspects of Neoplatonism, and can be considered a logical model. I think the difference is in specificity. It's not in content, but basically what all of these things say is that there is the one, or there is Brahman, there is this ultimate reality that instantiates itself, but its eternal essence is not in the world itself, but is in that ultimate reality. I think the main difference between the CTMU and Vedanta Hinduism and also Neoplatonism is that there's not as much of a distinction between the formal and the manifest, between this world of forms and the world of appearances. These are basically two ways of looking at the same thing. So for Plato, for example, the idea is our world is just like these like shifty, murky, like shadows of a larger world. And what the CTMU says is that that's true, and the universe is a self-simulation that authors itself through this formal universe, which is essentially the patterns of the non-terminal domain, is this truthful perception manifested into the universe. But that's not in some separate abstract world from the universe, but it's actually two elements of the same identity. So there's no real distinction between Maya and Brahman, or the world of forms and the world of appearances. So the difference between, to answer your question, between Vedanta and the CTMU is that one is not, is that either one, different forms of Hinduism that I've heard is either is dualistic, says that there is an absolute distinction between Brahman and Atman, between the individual and ultimate reality, which denies the ultimate basis of reality, or it's totally non-dual, or those are two things. But the CTMU is a little bit more subtle. It says that they're self-dual. They're two elements of the same identity, which means they have the same ultimate basis, but there is a real distinction. So there's the differences between non-duality and self-duality, which is subtle, but it's actually quite important to how reality works and what our role in it is.
Tommy, I've heard personally, you might be right, but I've heard people talk about Atman's Brahma or Brahman, and talk about Atman as a unique expression of Brahman, but which is ultimately, it's a unique expression of Brahman, but it is ultimately sorry, what was that, Bishop? Sorry, an ultimate expression that each individual Atman is God in their own way, is what I'm trying to get at. But like not completely God, just a part of God, but they do share an identity with God.
Yeah, so that would be CTMU consistent. The problem is when you start to say either that they are fully God, whereas according to the CTMU, we are just secondary images of God. And even though our highest level of identity is Brahman or ultimate reality, it's like we still have this terminal embodiment, and that is something different. And so the problem is either when you say that there is absolutely no distinction between Brahman or Atman, or you say that there is a distinction, but it's not, or you say that that distinction is so fundamental that it can't be overcome. So the CTMU is kind of in between those two positions, and is pretty similar to what you described, actually, is that we are, each of us, a unique self-expression of the ultimate reality, but we're not
the ultimate reality.
We're not the ultimate reality, and we have actually a shared reality. And so certain people will say that like the ultimate basis of reality lies in themselves and only themselves, and that starts to approach something closer to like solipsism, that you are actually the only thing in reality, and everything else is Maya, including other people. And that would not be CTMU consistent, because there's not really much of a point of creating this entire universe just for one person. So there is actually real existence to other Atmans, and we are at the one end of the mapping. The ultimate reality adheres within each of us, and we then in turn reciprocate that identity and define the identity of ultimate reality. So at the one end of the mapping, that ultimate reality is entirely personal, but at the other end, that absolute actually does have an impersonal existence that is separate from any of its individual creatures or instantiations.
Yeah. You said something about like avatars. I think I thought about avatars. Would you say that, very, very, very holy figures like Buddha or Christ, or, Yogananda, these swamis from India who might claim that they have been enlightened and things like that. Do you think that God, I mean, God is capable of anything, so God is surely capable of putting human clothes on and coming down as an avatar.
Yeah.
So yeah, but then would you still define that avatar as a, I guess that avatar is still in a unique body, but not, oh, bye Patrick. Um, but not, I don't know, like, do they have a unique signature in the CTMU or something?
Yeah, so well, the case of Jesus is a little bit different. I mean, we could get into that, but I won't. I'll say generically for like exceptionally righteous people are essentially more fully instantiating the identity of reality, and there's actually essentially, since they're living and not separating that their soul from the ultimate reality, they have they don't lose as much of their basis as fully God as they do. And so those people are actually, there's a stronger meomorphic mapping that connects God to his secondary images, and therefore you can kind of see that these people are not
I mean,
as, or have
that's
a higher spiritual status than ordinary human beings, and that is essentially a basic feature of like, if you are substantially more, then you are actually part of that metaphysical elect, which is not like in Calvinism where it's like predestined, but you are actual, that cast of people then form kind of an integral part of the way that God reinforces himself in the world, is through the ability of certain people who are exceptionally close to God to then act as proxies for God in the creation and become closer to these kind of primary telic recursive parameters, whereby their existence and God's existence are not as categorically separate. So you could see that with certain religious figures, saints, etc., who are
they seem to be, it's almost like once you hit a certain level of telic, um it's almost like once you're fully embracing of the full identity of God, as like some of these very few extremely powerful states were, they seem to almost gain the ability to perform miracles and sort of overrule the laws of physics almost. And I was just wondering what you think about that.
I don't know about that in particular. I think
I mean, what about Jesus walking on water? That's got to be an overruling of the second law of thermodynamics.
yeah, I mean, I don't, that's a good question. I'll think about that more. I think usually that miracles do have an ontological reality in the CTMU, but there's like it's like more tightly constrained
Is
within
is it like
logic.
the final last uh thing? Is it like, not Jesus, Moses parting the seas? It's like as a final resort.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, even according to, religion, miracles are not like a regular occurrence, but I think in certain instances, the standard laws of causation can be directly by inter intervened upon by like the primary teller, in order that you have something that like that strictly defies causation. But that's not like something random. Like if I just go out and get off a boat, I'm not to be able to walk on water. But it's always for a special teleological purpose. It's always for some greater significance or symbolism that is then at some point witnessed directly by people and then later is accepted as an article of faith by believers in that. So it's not so it's something that has to happen for a specific purpose.
Tommy, I'm sure you're extremely busy, but if you can find any time in your day to squeeze it in, I suggest you watch a lecture, or it could be honestly pretty much any lecture from Baba Ram Dass. Have you ever heard of him?
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, so Baba Ram Dass, he's a Western guru who went to the Himalayas and met his guru, and he has a lot of very, very interesting and compelling stories about his own guru performing miracles almost on a daily basis,
Yeah,
or like
okay.
from moment to moment, not like some special thing, but just like producing apples out of thin air and being in two places at once and being able to grow and shrink and do all these weird, crazy things. And I find it compelling to say the least.
Yeah, I've heard something similar with Wolfgang Smith talked about this in his interview with Kurt Mungel from the Theories of Everything podcast. But and how he went to India and met all these people and had these strange transfigurations and all these like things that seem to defy the way that causality seems to work. I mean,
Yeah.
there's still like kind of like a rationalist like feeling in my mind, which is like if this is something that is like a regular occurrence, then like what? Then like surely you could like everyone has a smartphone, like you could take a video of this. So like
Well, I've actually been on Instagram and I've seen interesting videos. I mean, they could obviously be fake. I am a skeptic as well as anybody else. I've spent most of my life being skeptical of most things, but I don't know. I think I just secretly want to live in a world where miracles happen,
yeah.
and I genuinely think that I already live in that world.
Mhm. Well,
But I've never seen a miracle happen. I've seen lots of synchronicities happen in my life, and I've seen lots of I've actually had dreams about things that happen the next day, and I've had feelings about something that was going to happen, or I said something, and then it happened a couple of seconds later. That's happened to me quite a lot, and it's happening to me more and more. But I've never seen a real miracle.
yeah,
I've
so
not been
that
able to read anybody's mind or anything.
yeah, so that sort of thing is more more easily understood than something like let's say turning water into wine.
It's a wine.
Yeah, is like I think that if you think about the universe itself, is that you can have our general phenomenon like phenomena that we see like communication, planning, goal setting, dreaming, thinking, and even motion. Like those are like a limiting case of paranormal operations, and there's actually more connectivity and all it the non-terminal domain spans timelines and is not subject to time or causation in the same way that we are. And so once you get past those kind of mechanistic constraints of locality in space, linearity in time, and terminality and causation, you can have these strange synchronicities, and especially mental things such as precognition, or a thought just comes to you and that you're in imminent danger or something, like that, and then you are, and then those, because you're not only a terminal body, but you're coupled with a non-terminal body. And so there are certain things, even in waking attention, which, and especially in dreaming, which have, things that aren't super, that are non-linear and can be thought of as sort of like a lower scale case of something paranormal or miraculous, and that sort of thing happens very, very frequently. And most people, if you ask them, will have some sort of experience with that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this, Tommy. I really
Hey,
appreciate it. Your talks are always very, very interesting.
Tommy, do you know if anyone has done any work on psychic phenomena explained through the CTMU?
Yeah, the two people I would point you to that for are Mathematical Metaphysics. Has another channel on YouTube, has like a very long series. I think it's probably in like, that is called Performing Paranormal Operations, which was one of the first I watched. And basically that goes through how basically every human is immersed in paranormality and goes very deep into the metaphysics of that. I mean, he's basically the primary theorist in that field as far as I'm concerned. And then that is, I think, also a very good introduction into the general ideas of the CTMU, through first kind of conceptually becoming interested in the paranormal or psychic abilities. And then also, this isn't someone who's in the CTMU, who is a CTMU theorist, but what's his face? But Rupert Sheldrake, who's been involved, who has a theory called morphic resonance, which is about the memory and consciousness of nature, has explicitly done a fair deal of work on research into paranormal phenomena as well. So those are the two people I'd suggest you check out, are Mathematical Metaphysics' series called Performing Paranormal Operations, as well as Rupert Sheldrake's research.
Thank you. Yeah, I've listened to some of Rupert Sheldrake's stuff and read some of his stuff. I was a very, very big fan of morphic resonance. But the mathematical metaphysics I have not looked at.
I've actually watched a lot of math. I used to. I don't so much these days, but I used to watch a lot of mathematical metaphysics, and he is a really good source for this stuff.
Very good. Thank you, guys.
Amazing.
Can I just say one other example? It's this guy. He's not exact. He is into the paranormal. He is into things like magic and rituals and things like that. But he also does it in an extremely subtle and an extremely modern way to bring in things like, he brings in things like game theory. He's a guy called Jason Lowe, and he's very interesting to talk to look at about spiritual stuff, and kind of look in a through more modern glasses.
That's funny. Somebody just yesterday brought him up to me. You spell his last name Louve?
Louv.
Louv. Okay. Yeah, they brought his name up to me yesterday. Yeah, it is. They definitely brought him up to me yesterday. They were like, I watch all of this, or I listen to all of his stuff. So yes.
Yeah. I did his course, which is very expensive, by the way. I did his course, Attaining the True Will, and it's had an incredible impact on my life.
Wow. Okay.
He does courses where he teaches magical, not just rituals, but just these concepts from old ancient mystical systems of different types, and he just mixes it in with current psychology theory. It's very cool.
And does he have stuff on YouTube, or is it all
Yes,
his course?
yes, no,
Okay.
he has lots of stuff on YouTube. If you type in Jason Lowe, in fact, if you go onto Netflix and you type in the what is it called? The Midnight Gospel. There's a you might not like it, but it's an animation style thing on Netflix, and it's got one of the guest stars as Jason Lowe, and he talks about things like Buddhism, and it's very cool.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
That's okay.
Well, amazing. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you,
It's
Tommy.
been great.
Have a great day, guys.
Have a great day. Bye bye.
Bye.